I want to talk about cancer today because there's so many misconceptions about it on the internet to the point where I can actually write a book. Um, there's basically two main categories when it comes to the misconceptions. One of them is fuck the government, and the other one is fuck doctors. When it comes to fuck the government, it seems most of these theories, if not all, come from America, and I'm starting to believe that maybe the people over there hate their government, which is fine, But can you keep it contained and take it up with your government? Don't let it seep into Europe because it's really annoying. And I know it's coming from America because most of these people who are fuck the government in Romania, they use English slogans, the same English slogans that are. It's like, okay, I can see where this ideology is coming from now. Do you understand? Um, but yeah, so the fuck the government works on the assumption that the government wants to kill people. And they say that the government is putting things into the water and putting things into the food in order to reduce the population. And if that's the case, you probably have the most incompetent government that has existed on the face of the earth. Because when governments around the world want to kill people, do you know what they do? They kill people. We know this because of China, and we know this because of the USSR. When the USSR wanted to kill people, they starved them to death. Very cheap to do, very easy, and it's time efficient if that's what you want. When China did it, they had certain incentives for people not to have children, not to have many kids, and even to abort healthy female fetuses, right? So the Chinese government, again, very efficient, very cheap. But then I'm trying to think about the United States government. So on one hand, they're giving all sorts of benefits for young people who marry, right? So they encourage marriage in order to encourage children. They're spending millions of dollars on fertility research. And at the same time, I guess they're also spending millions of dollars on the chemicals they have to push in the water and in the food. Um, I Not to mention that this is usually corporations that deal with food and water, not actually the government. But we have to fuck the government. All right, so I'll explain why we have more cancers today. It's actually pretty simple to explain. The second one is fuck the doctors. Now, the doctors are killing people who get cancer by poisoning them. This is new. This is actually one of the new theories from the Enlightenment people. Now, I wonder, how are these people managing to do it? Like, there's people that I know at the University of Medicine who studied cancer for decades, literally decades. And if you ask them, they will say that they still don't know even half of what there is to know about cancer. Yet some people, they go on a blog for 5 or 10 minutes, and yet they're experts. How do you manage to do it? Like, I need to know, because apparently the way university professors study is not correct, because apparently you can learn a lot faster in like 5 or 10 minutes and become an educated expert. So first of all, let's talk about what cancer is, right? It is one of the most interesting diseases. And when you say cancer, you're actually talking about a series of illnesses that are coming from a single cell. Now, when a cell becomes cancerous, it becomes immortal. The reason it becomes immortal is because it stops aging. It also stops listening to the rest of the body, and it starts duplicating and reproducing at an alarming rate. So a cell that every single cell in your organism has a specific function, and they have to play a specific role. And when they're finished playing the role, naturally they die. In the case of cancer, these cells go rogue, and they start listening to what the body tells them. And the only thing that they start to do is to divide constantly, which is why you get the tumor. The tumor is actually the cell that started dividing itself over and over to the point where you can see it macroscopically. So what's interesting about this is that any single cell in your body that has the ability to reproduce, to duplicate, can create a cancer. This is why you have things like skin cancer, right? The skin cell can reproduce. This is why you can have colon cancer. The colon also has the ability. The colon cell also has the ability to reproduce, so on and so forth, including bone cancer. I want to show you something really scary, actually. Um, see if I can find the picture. Yeah, this is actually one of the scariest shit I have seen in my life. This is at, I believe, a United States museum or a university. And you can see how the cells of the bone started dividing and reproducing uncontrollably to the point where they even went into the eye socket. Like, I don't want to be this guy, right? So another example of a bone tumor is here, right? So the problem with treating cancer, as you can see, is that if a single cell that is cancerous remains alive, it can start duplicating again, and it can take the process all the way back from the beginning. Not only does cancer cell multiplicate so rapidly, they also spread into other parts of the body. So a cancer that can start from the lung can go all the way, a cancer that started from the stomach can go all the way to the lungs, to the kidney, to the liver, until the patient dies, because of the huge growth of the tumor that's going to press on various other organs, that's going to cause bleeding, going to give anemia, and all sorts of nice things. Right, so how does the tumor basically from the stomach go into other parts of the body? Usually through the bloodstream. Again, you only need one cancerous cell to go into the bloodstream and manage to get into another part of the body. And once it reaches there, it's going to start reproducing as well. So you're now going to have two different tumors. And then you're going to have three different tumors. It can also spread through the lymph nodes, and it can also spread through creeping in towards other tissues. Pretty much like how I guess the Zerg creep, if you play StarCraft, operates. That's why it's called a creep tumor, because that's what exactly it does. It just spreads the creep around, right? Now, again, these cells are very interesting because they're immortal. These cells never die as long as they have the natural resources for them to survive, right? So if you were to take a cancer cell and put it in a lab and constantly provide nourishment for it, it will never die. The only reason cancer dies is because the host dies, and thus it runs out of resources. But it's very interesting for scientists, right? Because it is one of the only immortal life forms that we know. The problem with it is that, again, these cells don't listen to the rest of the body. They don't do the function, so they're completely useless when it comes to keeping the host alive. So one of the interesting things about cancer is that most cells, they do have a system called apoptosis, which is basically the cell committing suicide. And this happens, for instance, in certain viral infections, like if the cell has been infected with a virus, it actually kills itself. It happens if the cell has some weird copy of the DNA, like it's completely unsustainable, and the cell again kills itself. But in the case of cancer cells, they manage not to do that. They manage to avoid apoptosis. Like other cells around the body, it says kill yourself, and they don't. Also, it's interesting that the tumors that are being created by the cancer cells, they start taking resources away from the main body. They actually have their own series of arteries where they literally suck in resources from the rest of your body, which is going to be very important in diagnosing cancer. Right, so now that you know what cancer is, let's talk about some of the symptoms that patients show when they have cancer. And again, these symptoms aren't necessarily a diagnosis for cancer, but if doctors see that you have 1, 2, or 3 of these symptoms, they are going to do further investigations and further checks in order to see if the patient is not having a tumor. So the first symptom, which is the most obvious, is weight loss. Now we're talking about a significant weight loss to the point where you can see the patient. You'll need to excuse the mouse. There's nothing I can do about it. To the point where you can visibly see how the patient managed to lose 5 to 6 kilograms in the course of 1 month without him doing any sort of change in his lifestyle. So he didn't go to the gym. He didn't stop eating as much. He kept doing what he was supposed to do, and all of a sudden you see him like, right? So this is one of the alarm signs. Now, usually patients at the hospital, they will say that they lost several holes at the belt. This is actually how doctors manage to diagnose them, because most people don't weigh themselves on a daily basis, right? They don't have a scale in order to see how many kilograms they lost, especially when it comes to men. Women probably do, but the way I would ask a patient that says I've lost some weight is like, okay, how many holes at the belt did you notice? Because most people, before they go to work, they put a belt on and they know the hole. So if they notice that all of a sudden they have the belt a lot more loosely than they had it before, then 2 or 3 holes is definitely a warning sign. Coughing up blood is another one. Blood in the stool. Stool in the form of a crayon is also a significant risk factor, because the tumor is pressing on the colon. So when the stool comes out, because of the smaller space, it's going to look like a crayon. Anemia is also something worrisome, because usually there is bleeding when it comes to the cancer, and due to this blood loss that happens internally, the patient is going to look pale as a sheet, and he doesn't really know why this is. He doesn't have any sort of visible bleeding, he doesn't have any problem, right? But he is white as a sheet, and when you take his blood works, you notice that his hemoglobin can be incredibly low. It's interesting about the human body. If you have like a significant blood loss that happens at once, you can go into shock, right? And obviously you are going to die. But if it happens over the course of a long period of time, it's interesting that humans can survive massive blood loss that normally they wouldn't be able to, because the body adapts to the slow change. Quick changes for the body are very difficult to adapt. Slow changes are easy, right? Then I guess any sort of ulcer can be also cancerous, because an ulcer can be malign or benign. If it's malign, then it's caused by cancer cells. So what doctors will do, they will put a hose with a camera on top into your mouth until it reaches your stomach, and then it will manage to pinch at the lesion, and then they will put it under a microscope, and they will see if it's cancer cells or not. Anyway, these are some of the warning signs. Again, if you see a patient with anemia, doesn't mean it has cancer. What it means is that you should look to see the cause of the anemia, and you have to have cancer in your mind while you do this. You have to think, okay, it could be. So the problem with treating cancer, right? This is one of the most difficult things. When I talked about before about antibiotics, treating a germ infection is really easy. You have to think of a substance that leaves your cell alone but kills anything that's not part of your cells, right? So a substance that leaves what's part of your body alone but kills anything that shouldn't be there. Very easy to detect, right? In the case of a cancer, it's hard because we're talking about your own cells. So, what substance can you use that doesn't kill your cells but kills the cancerous cells, which are technically still your cells? This is why the immune system sometimes has a problem detecting cancer, because it detects it as your own cells. And even today with modern medicine, doctors are still having a hard problem doing this. So one of the ways that they do it is, since the cell is visible to the eye, in some cases, if it's detected right away, they just try to cut it out. But the problem with cutting it out is that if a single cell has remained there, the cancer will come back, because the cell is going to start replicating itself over and over until, right, the problem that you had before reappears. This is why for most cancers, it's said that you need to have at least 5 years cancer-free before you can say that you've been cured. Another way of doing it is by bombarding the tumor with radiations. So the space where the tumor is located in, and you just throw a dose of radiation at it. And again, this will hurt your other cells as well. This is why people who go to radiation therapy, they complain about pain, about how difficult the treatment is. because there is no other way, right? There is no major difference between your cell and the cancer cells, as I said before. So this is the only way we know how to treat it. Another way is chemotherapy. Now, chemotherapy is injecting poison into your blood in order to make sure that the cells who divide rapidly are the ones that are being attacked. And this is why people who have cancer are going to lose their hair, because hair is another cell that divides rapidly, and these are the ones that are being killed by the poison. So when people say that doctors are using poison to treat cancer patients, it is true, but the cancer patient knows about it. Like, the doctor does inform the cancer patient, and he tells you, look, you have two choices. You can either do this treatment that we have, or you can choose not to take the treatment. It's up to you. And the doctor will say it has a 60% success rate or a 40% success rate, right? Depending on the cancer, depending on how much the cancer has gone into the body. If you catch a cancer earlier, it's a lot easier to treat because you only have the main tumor. If you catch it in the later stages, when there's tumors already being spread around the body, then it's very difficult to treat. And all you can do is just make sure that the patient feels comfortable, as the inevitable is going to happen. So anyone who says, oh, well, the doctors are putting poison into people, well, if you have any alternative solution, doctors are willing to hear it. Hell, you can even write a scientific book and make sure that it gets published. You're probably going to win the Nobel Prize. But right now, this is one of the only ways we know how to cure cancer, to attack the cells that divide rapidly. And there are other cells in your body that also divide rapidly who are also going to be attacked by this. Again, it's a poison that doesn't discriminate, right? Which is why, again, chemo is very difficult for patients to handle. They are going to puke a lot. They are going to feel very sick, very ill. And unfortunately, again, there is no other alternative. The one that I know that they're working on, if you watch my immunology video, and you can see how the Jesus, I have a brain freeze now. You can see how the antibodies look. One of the ways they think about it is like to have an isotope at the end of the antibody, and the antibody should be made to target the cell, the tumor. And once it latches onto the tumor, it injects the isotope directly into the tumor. And if this would be a treatment for the future, maybe 20 or 30 years from now, then we could just give up chemo. And this would be like a really interesting way of curing cancer. Okay, so now let's talk about the interesting conspiracy theories, right? The fact that we are getting cancer more now than we used to get into the past. This is my favorite one. And because of that, the government is killing people or whatever. So the problem with this is that you have people who already found the conclusion, the government is evil, and now they're looking for evidence. And when they do this, they always fall for the same trap, which is correlation equals causation. So they will find, okay, a huge increase in cancer, clearly the government is going to do it. In order to not fall for correlation equals causation, is once you find the answer, you need to check to see maybe there's other reasons for it. But this is what the mind of an ideologue doesn't do. It gets stuck. The moment it found its confirmation bias, that's it. Research over. There is no need to carry on. There is no need to verify if what you have found is actually what happens in reality. In the case of cancer, people either die from it at a very early age, so we're talking about babies with infant tumors and stuff like that, or a very old age. Usually cancer rarely attacks people in the middle age, right? And because in 2017 we have managed to push the boundaries of medicine to the point where people that are 90 years old can still be alive, and you have an older population, much bigger than we had in our previous generation, not only because of medicine, but because of less wars, because of famine not being a thing. Obviously, when the elderly population is bigger, a disease that mostly attacks the elderly population is going to grow. So the reason cancer attacks old people is because what actually causes the cells to go rogue is in one part the immune system keeps them in check, And in the other part is the fact that whenever a cell divides, as you know, the DNA gets copied from one place to the other. However, when this happens, the DNA can have certain errors. And when the DNA has errors is what we call mutations. And one of these errors could actually cause the cell to go rogue. Now, as more and more cells constantly get copied throughout a person's lifetime, the DNA becomes less and less similar to what it used to be, and the copying process becomes worsened. Uh, Basically, what happens is the likelihood of you getting a cancer is far greater as you're going through the aging process. And also, all people have weaker immune system, and these two go hand in hand, which makes it more likely for an older person to have a cancer. And this explains why more people are having cancer today. Now, it's also interesting to point out something that I was told at med school. People don't die of old age. This is a ridiculous concept that doesn't exist in medicine. People die from heart attack, people die from kidney failure, people die from blood loss, people die from stroke. People don't die from old age. So when you say people died of cancer, it actually can mean that the person died of old age. I don't think anyone would look at an old lady age 99 who passed away and wouldn't say that, okay, she died of old age. Because 40 years ago, right, people didn't have the ability to diagnose most of these things. And if they would see, let's say, 85-year-old man who passes away, they would say, oh, he died, a good death. He died he died of old age. But now today with our science, we can actually look and we say, okay, he died from, I don't know, colon cancer or prostate cancer or something like that, right? So that is the difference. Most people who spread these theories, they completely ignore medicine's ability to diagnose people. It's not necessarily that a disease suddenly has raised in numbers. It can also be that now we have the possibility of diagnosing it, and when comparing it to previous charts where they couldn't diagnose it, all of a sudden you look and you're like, oh my god, there's a cancer epidemic. No, it's not. It's just, again, people are getting so old that their body is breaking apart at a cellular level, and this is natural. This is a natural process, right? Everyone needs to die of old age, and unfortunately, cancer is one of the ways that you're going to die if you manage not to die until then. There's probably more than millions. I would even say billions of dollars spent worldwide on cancer research. People try to figure out how to stop cancer, not only necessarily because of empathy, but because doctors understand they will get old as well, and it's a really nasty disease to have. It's one of the worst disease to get. Nothing is sadder than to watch a person just being eaten away by cancer. So they are investing money in order to figure out treatments for these things. Because the current treatment we have is quite barbaric. Even doctors say, like, we're at the dark ages of treating cancer, because we're not using the scalpel, we're using the hammer. Like, you don't really target the cell, you're targeting every cell in the body. And so far, there is no way of knowing how to not do this. So, okay, things that can give cancer, as I said, let's talk about the risks, right? The biggest risk, the number one thing that makes sure that puts you in danger is genetic, right? Because as I said before, cancer is also a genetic disease. So if your parents, and I'm talking your mother or your father, had cancer, you should be worried. You should talk to your doctor, and depending on which type of cancer your mom or your dad had, you should start getting screenings. Now, again, cancer is very easy to treat if it's detected rapidly, right? So if you're a woman and your mom had breast cancer, you should go to the doctor to have a sound taken on your mammary glands. You should also check it yourself. There's plenty of videos on YouTube that show how women should grow up their tits. This is something that I don't understand about women having tumors in their tits and not going to the doctor. It's like, for me, it's quite baffling, but I guess I'm not a woman. Like, when you take a shower and you wash, don't you feel it? I mean, is this like the disease of dirty tits? Because honestly, like, if I were to, right, and you go to shower and you find it's like a little ball inside. You're like, what the fuck is this shit? Like, I mean, if I would have, I honestly think, and I'm not kidding, I honestly think that I said this during the university and everyone laughed, but I don't understand why people can't treat this as a serious matter. That this is one of the reason men don't get as much testicular cancer as women get breast cancer. Because if I would have testicular cancer downtown, whenever I put my hand there, it's like, oh, this wasn't there yesterday. What is the meaning of this? So why isn't it the same for women? Also, it's like maybe it's the disease of single women, because when I would have a girlfriend, I would be like, oh, darling, what is this? We need to go to a doctor tomorrow, right? It's just a lot of people are actually afraid of investigating when they have killer titties, because I don't understand this mindset. They're like, oh, what if it's cancer? It's like, well, it's going to be cancer whether you investigate it or not. Oh, but I don't want the news. Well, you're going to get the news once it becomes, a lot more severe. So better just go and investigate it now rather than wait and find out later. Because it's still going to happen if it's happening, but at least you get a chance to treat it. Okay, so genetic is the number one, right? And again, screening. I don't know what was for men to get the hose with the camera up your butt. I think it's like from 50 years forward, you just have to do screening, or was it 40 years? Anyway, not my favorite subject, honestly. But screening means that a healthy person goes to the doctor and just investigates the area that you find to be more likely to have problems. Another one is lifestyle. So food is the second. When it comes for food, it's usually smoked meat. This is why people who live in Japan have a higher rate of cancer, to the point where the Japanese are actually the world's experts when it comes to stomach cancer. And this is again because of the food. Eating smoked meat is very dangerous. Also, health factors, exposure to sunlight. This is what someone asked me in a previous video. Well, V, you said that you need exposure to sunlight to get vitamin D, but at the same time, you also said that exposure to sunlight gives cancer. The answer is moderation, right? Going out on a nice, beautiful day for a jog gives you sun exposure, and you're going to get vitamin D. Going to the beach naked when there's 45 degrees outside, or going to get a tan, in one of these tanning salons, that actually can give you skin cancer. Now, again, it's percentage based, right? So not everyone who goes to the beach is going to get skin cancer. But apparently the sun can have these effects to cause your cells to mutate and become cancerous. Another one is smoking is actually on the top. And then you get certain medications, viruses as well. I believe the human papilloma virus is a direct cause for cancer, which is why we have a vaccine against it now, and it's the only vaccine against cancer that we know. The problem with the human papilloma virus is it's a sexually transmitted disease, which has no symptoms in men. However, it affects women. So a man who doesn't know that he has it is going to pass it on to several women who are going to find out about it years after the thing happens. So it's very difficult to pinpoint and diagnose. This is why you should use a condom when you're having sex. It's never bad to use a condom. I don't get why people don't use condoms. Like when it comes to the science behind the condom, it has made the layer of rubber to be so thin that it's very little difference. Like, at least I don't get it. But there are other people who complain and say, no, I want to go in naked. And like, okay, but you're exposing yourself to all sorts of risks, plus the possibility of having an unwanted pregnancy. Right. Alcohol, hepatitis B, another virus that can give cancer. Right, now let's talk about the putting chemicals in food and water. Now, the thing with this is that the moment the government finds out that a meat company uses something that might, okay, we're not talking that does, that might give cancer, immediately they are forcing the company to use something else. And again, the problem with cancer is that any sort of compound that people use that might give you cancer takes years until people find out, right? So this is where the invisible hand of the market doesn't work, because if you have, let's say, a new product on the market, like some burgers, and they're using, I don't know, some sort of new antibiotic in the pig, and it turns out that this antibiotic somehow gives the pig liver cancer, or, no, sorry, it doesn't give the pig liver cancer, but this antibiotic is causing some changes within the pig that when consumed, people get cancer, stomach cancer. It will take at least 10 years until the population gets infected. And even then, how will you be able to pinpoint, where hundreds of thousands of people got cancer from at the age of 80? You're probably not, right? So this is why the invisible hand of the market doesn't work in this case. But always there's people that are paid by the government to figure out, different substances, different compounds, if they can or can't get certain mutations that will give cancer to people. And whenever they find one that even remotely causes cancer, they immediately take it off the market. Because governments don't want people to get sick. Government requires a healthy population so that you can work and you can pay taxes. If governments have a lot of people getting sick, then it's the government's responsibility to solve the situation. So they would rather not deal with the situation to begin with, because in case they don't solve it, they're the ones who are going to have their heads literally being hauled on the wall. And the idea that, again, this is what pisses me off, it's like governments want to kill people. Like, governments aren't saints. I'm not saying that governments don't do nasty shit, but this for me doesn't make sense, because if the governments would want to kill people, historically we know that they do kill people when they want to. And it's happening right away, and it's happening cheaply. Cancer is not one of these ways, okay? And the reason is that the governments are made by people as well, right? So one of the questions that I always ask myself when it's a conspiracy theory is like, does it affect the rich? If the answer is yes, then chances is that it's not a conspiracy theory. If the answer is no, then maybe you might be onto something. But in the case of cancer, it affects everyone. It affects rich people, it affects poor people, it affects people who work in the government, it affects doctors, it affects people in big pharma. So it's not in their interest to have something in the food supply. Not to mention, if you have something in the food supply, let's say you have it in, I don't know, plants. Well, if that's the case, then livestock is also going to suffer from it. And when livestock suffers from it, you now have an additional crisis on your hand. But anyway, it's like talking with ideologues. Why do I even bother? I hope you guys learned a little thing or two. I hope this video was of some use. I just felt the need to rant about it, because it's really annoying when you see people who are uneducated on the subject to have these claims. Like, I don't mind if someone actually tries to read on the subject before they talk about it, and then you can have a discussion, but these people don't even bother reading about the subject. They don't have like a fundamental understanding of what they're talking about. And then they go on and they read of some blogger that just gives them, like, the thing. It's like, oh, the number of cancers have raised in 2017. Don't you think it's the government? It's like, well, yeah, people can diagnose it better. We know this. It's people get more older in 2017 than they got in 1950. Yeah. Looking forward to read the comment section.